In one of my previous videos, I talked about Andor's first season and how, even though I thought it was great, it's not quite the masterpiece some people think it is. That video ended up with a whopping 2 to 5 like to dislike ratio. Just look at this, 2 likes and 5 dislikes. So it's safe to say that people generally didn't agree with me on the quality of Andor's first season, but now that the second season is all wrapped up, I'm here to say that fine, Andor is peak Star Wars. The second season at least. Getting straight into things, the first 3 episodes were actually kind of weak sauce, but it doesn't really matter because the rest of the season is pretty great. But starting the season with Andor stealing this TIE fighter and then being stranded with a bunch of weirdos was not great. This is all he does for a quarter of the season, 3 whole episodes, which is like 2 hours worth of show, even more than that. It was certainly a strange writing decision and a pretty tonally awkward way to start the season for the main character, if you can even call him that, because this show is about so many people and it just happens to be named after him. Anyway, something else to mention about the first few episodes is that scene, which I definitely wouldn't have included if I was running the show, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. I'm not a fan of it though, since I get the feeling that they did it just to bring more attention to the show, especially after they really drove it home with this line. Andor is plenty mature already, and it did not need this scene if you ask me. But anyway, Mon Mothma is also a big part of the season, and she spends the first 3 episodes at her daughter's wedding, which definitely takes up too much time, but is generally still a highlight of the season. And now that I'm thinking about it, I guess Mon Mothma just left her daughter completely behind when she gave her speech and went to Yavin. Is she that committed to the rebellion to leave her daughter? I guess going through with the wedding already meant that she was leaving her daughter behind for the sake of the rebellion, but still, some mother she is. Not to discredit her too much though, because she is obviously still very important to the rebellion, and for the sake of the galaxy, I guess, you just gotta leave your kids behind. Next, I'm gonna talk very briefly about Saw Gerrera, who does not show up too much in the season, but that's part of why it is so great when he actually does show up. Some of the best scenes in the season feature him, and they did his character so much justice, even with the little amount of time he got, at least compared to the main characters. Seeing an extremist character like him and his group is just so satisfying to me, as we're shown that the galaxy isn't just the bad guy Imperials and the good guy Rebels, but it's more diverse. Now, moving on to Gorman, possibly the most significant segment of this season, and just a very well executed storyline that characterizes and displays the Empire better than any other Star Wars movie or show. This is what the real Empire looks like, not whatever we got in the Obi-Wan series. Anyway, Gorman could and probably will be talked about for hours by people much wiser than me, so I'm not going to go very in-depth at all for the sake of time. I'm mostly going to talk about the Gorman Massacre, as it is one of the most significant events in Star Wars history and is just great television, especially when it comes to the role of one Syril Karn, who I deem to be one of the greatest characters in all of Star Wars. He finally gets Andor right where he wants him, staring down the barrel of his blaster, and he does nothing. He realized that his career was all a sham, that everything he was doing in the past season and a half to try to prove himself was all a lie. He was the bad guy the whole time. And right as he realizes this, right as he discovers that the man he'd been chasing for so long might have actually been the good guy, his story ends. And an amazing story it was, particularly because of how heartbreaking it was. But again, much wiser people will probably make hour-long videos focusing solely on Syril, and good on them because somebody's got to do it. Anyway, when I said I was going to talk about Gorman, I really just wanted to talk about that, and one other thing being Mon Mothma's speech. Now, I'll be honest, I don't think her speech was perfect by any means. Her main point about how the Senate and the galaxy can no longer differentiate between what's said and what's true is an important message, and she sends that message very passionately and effectively, but the writers definitely made her speech a bit dramatic, if you ask me. Dramatic even for a TV show, yes. It's kind of like they wrote the speech, but the showrunners were like, we need it a bit longer so it hits harder. Could you do that for us? And they did, and it's still great, but I wouldn't call it a masterpiece. Yes, I know I'm being very harsh. It's not even a masterpiece. How could I say that? There are some banger lines though, like I personally love when she says,
we become vulnerable to the appetite of whatever monster screams the loudest.
That one hit pretty hard. But before we move on, I'd like to point out that Gorman, as a planet and as a people, really is a prime example of masterful world building, some of the best we've seen in Star Wars, so appreciate that because who knows when we'll get it again. Next, let's talk about the final arc of the season, which begins with Lonnie leaking the Death Star's existence to Luthen, who proceeds to off him. Rest in peace, Lonnie. The first episode of this arc is focused on Luthen and Clea and their relationship, and it really was quite the treat. Great performances all around, which is to be expected from these great actors, but little Clea also does an amazing job. Now, this episode is obviously not traditional Andor. We don't even see Andor himself, but that helps it stand out as one of the best episodes in the entire series. Luthen and Clea were already great, but this episode solidifies them to me as peak Star Wars characters. Luthen already was actually, but Clea and her role in these final 3 episodes puts her in that category as well. Anyway, this episode is so good. Seeing Clea and Luthen's past and how their bond is formed is so sweet, and it makes the ending to this episode even more depressing. But, and not to be morbid, I'm not sure why Luthen didn't just completely off himself, instead letting the ISB take him and keep him alive. I guess he wanted Clea to be the one to to do it, but I'm not sure if Luthen is the kind of guy to put her in danger like that, forcing her to go on that whole hospital mission. I don't know though, I'm probably just overthinking it. This episode still rocks. Now after that, the season wraps up with the rebellion getting the message of Jedha, Kyber, Urso, which obviously leads directly to Rogue One. First, I will briefly talk about episode 11, which sees Kleya getting the information to Andor and also Dedramiro getting interrogated by Krennic. This is her last prominent appearance, and after Gorman, it perfectly wraps up her arc with a great performance by both her and Krennic. Okay, now before we move on, I should mention that from this point on in the video, my pathetic little monkey brain mistakenly thought that the beginning of episode 12 was actually still episode 11, so when I refer to episode 12, I'm only referring to the point in the story where everybody is back on Yavin. Okay, continue. This episode also gives us the Kleya rescue mission, which is pretty great, and K2SO finally returns in full, and he's pretty freaking awesome. Then in episode 12, everybody returns to Yavin, and it's really just a lot of dialogue, and nothing that climactic happens, you know, for the final episode of the show, but it works surprisingly well and was honestly a great way to end the show and set up Rogue One. This episode has maybe my favorite scene in all of Andor, which is when Andor stands up for Luthen in front of all the leaders of the rebellion. We already knew that he and Mon Mothma and Kleya knew just how much Luthen did for the rebellion, but it's so satisfying to finally see one of them give him the respect he deserves in front of less appreciative and less understanding people. Luthen knew that he wasn't going to be seen as a hero and that his sacrifices wouldn't be acknowledged by many people, if any, and even that he might be forgotten, but that never mattered to him, and it's part of why he's such an amazing character. What Andor said to the leaders didn't change any of that. It didn't solidify Luthen's legacy or have him be remembered better or anything, but it further deepened Andor's character and his relationship with Luthen, and like I said, it was just so satisfying to see.
But it's insulting to hear him run down by people who have given a fraction of his sacrifice to this rebellion. Enough!
It's lines like that that make me love this scene and this show so much. But enough explaining, enough going through all the episodes. Why exactly is Andor peak Star Wars? Well, because it is shot very well, directed very well, written very well, and a bunch of other technical things that we should all expect from a gigantic rich company like Disney. But the reason why Andor shines is because the show and the people behind it were brave enough to make it a slow-paced, mature, and honestly depressing political thriller instead of just another lazy, action-packed, dopamine-releasing show that so many recent Star Wars products have turned out to be. Not to mention the fact that Andor perfectly complements not just Rogue One, but the first 6 movies as well. It bridges the gap between the prequels and the original trilogy and offers so much great storytelling and just so much great Star Wars content, all while not even being necessary to watch in order to understand the main story of the Empire and Anakin Skywalker and all that. But of course, Andor still stands out on its own, introducing us to amazing new characters like Luthen and Syril and Kleya and Vel and Dedra and Bloomin and Bix and Lonnie, and basically Andor rules. And now that the show is complete, I guess I will finally admit it is peak Star Wars. Season 1 on its own, not peak Star Wars. Season 2, easily peak Star Wars, and the show as a whole, definitely peak Star Wars. But let me know what you think in the comments, and if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. It really does mean so much to me. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please consider dropping a like and a sub, and until next time.